It's now my pleasure to introduce Catherine Allgor, who is a graduate of Mount Holyoke College, so she's a local, and a recipient of a PhD from Yale University. She has led the Massachusetts Historical Society since 2017. Prior to that, she was director of education at the Huntington Library in San Marino, California, and a professor of history at the University of California, Riverside. Her list of publications is impressive, and I'll just mention one. Her book on Dolly Madison, The Problem of National Unity, probably has good lessons for us today, that was published in 2012. Founded in 1791, the Massachusetts Historical Society is an independent research library with millions of manuscript documents, printed materials, and artifacts. Bringing these materials to bear on issues facing us today is one of the topics that I hope she'll address in her presentation, A New Massachusetts Historical Society for the 21st Century. And after Catherine is finished, her colleague, Elyssa Tardif, will join us, because I really do worry about the next generation of historians and humanists in general. But I hope that an introduction to the National History Day competition will bring this program back to Amherst. And I mean, I'm willing to do what I can do as an individual, but I think we really need to foster the love and appreciation of history, because it needs to be passed on purposely from generation to generation. So, Catherine, it's all yours, and I thank you in advance.
Thank you so much. I have to say, seeing your background, Gigi, and Amy's as well, I'm so sorry we're not here in person.
I know, I am too.
At this kind of moment, usually someone like me says, it's such an honor to be here. It's such a pleasure. But in this case, I really mean it. It is an honor and a pleasure to be with you in company and to be the Mabel Loomis Todd lecturer. I think I'm that. Anyway, I have spent, and if you don't mind, I'm going to indulge a little bit and talk a little bit personally, because I've spent short bursts of time in Amherst with the Historical Society and the Jones Library. Very short, really, if you measure them by days or months. But Amherst played such an important part in my own intellectual awakening. I just thought I would reflect a little bit. I first came to Amherst in the late 70s, right from drama school, to teach mime at Hampshire College. Now, Alyssa's not from Amherst, so she's probably thinking, mime, it's not a big deal. Elyssa, at Hampshire College, it was practically a major. So that's what I'm going to say. But in addition to growing as a teacher there, I found myself in this beautiful small town that looked like the small towns of Europe. And remember, in the 70s and 80s, this is before other places had discovered the value of their main streets. And so the Amherst Main Street was just, beautiful. And I became also, I think, a little bit more sophisticated about colleges and universities, something that's going to stand me in good stead a little bit later. Even my palate got more sophisticated. I had homemade ice cream for the first time at Bart's. And does anyone remember that pastry of Suzanne Nagel? Was it Nagel?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God, there was one thing I needed to discuss it at more length. That was just delicious. I even had raclette. They had opened a raclette restaurant way back then. So, but my memories were not necessarily just of food, but of that kind of intellectual engagement. 5 years later, in the mid-'80s, I was an actor in New York and New Jersey and was given the role of a lifetime, which was Emily Dickinson in The Belle of Amherst. And my producer and director, Nick Procaccino, and I decided that this was not just an ordinary role, that it was going to take a certain kind of depth of research. And I made a decision that at the time, again, I was a very uneducated person. I didn't really know was going to take me into a certain direction. I didn't know, for instance, the word primary source, but I made the decision that I was not going to read the many, 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 many books about Emily Dickinson, but I was just going to walk in her footsteps. And so I thought I would just read her words and her poems and her letters. And there was a very famous book, I think it was The Days and Hours of Emily Dickinson, which was really a collection of primary sources from the newspaper. And I would go and live in Amherst. And that's when I got to know Daniel Lombardo, who was kinder and more and took me more seriously than I deserved. I remember coming to the Historical Society and seeing Mabel Loomis Todd's, I'm going to say Japoneserie, if that's a word, but all of her stuff from Japan. And I forget who showed me, but the docents or the staff was just lovely. I had read Polly Longworth's work at that moment, and she was like a rock star to me. So it was I only stayed for a few months, but I did go on to play the part of Emily Dickinson for many years after that. In the early 90s, when I was about 30, even though I was doing pretty well at the acting game, I decided I wanted an education. I didn't really know what that meant, but I just knew that's something I wanted. But I didn't know a lot about colleges or universities, but Emily Dickinson had gone to Mount Holyoke. And so I became a Frances Perkins scholar. And one of the first things I did as a new member of my dorm was take my dorm mates on a tour of the Emily Dickinson house. So pardon me for indulging myself in a little walking down memory lane, but really Amherst and the historical atmosphere of the society and the people there really did form a lot of my intellectual life that led me to becoming a professional historian. But now to the topic at hand. I hope to tell you a compelling story with lots of interesting new things for you, but there's going to be a lot of familiar themes to everybody around the table here. There's going to be stuff about a building that's kind of old. There's going to be real estate implications. There's going to be a dramatic story of storage problems, strategic plan fatigue, and again, other elements that I think will be familiar to you all. I came to the Historical Society in 2017. I had moved here from California, and I wasn't on the job yet when the powers that be, led by Dennis Freno, asked me if I wanted to attend a facilities meeting. It's before I became president. But I thought, sure, I'll go. I'll sit. I won't say a word because, I'm not official yet. And I walked into a facilities meeting that I realized was a discussion that had been going on for a long time, and it was about our building. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's 1899 Beaux-Arts building, beautiful. Unlike many historical societies, it was not a house. It was purpose-built for the society. And so what was the society in 1899? Well, it was a clubhouse, really, a beautiful clubhouse for gentlemen of a certain gender, age, race, class to sit around smoking cigars and reading their family's papers. And here we were trying to have a historical society in it. And I sat through the discussion, and this was space planning along the kind of line. And again, this is going to sound familiar. If we take this closet and put a door on it and shift it this way, we could have an office, or we could move a lavatory here and try to put in a little kitchen. It was very much like tweaking things here and there. And I swore I wasn't going to say anything, but they did ask me what I thought. And so I gently suggested at that moment that we were kind of tweaking our mission to fit this building, but possibly we might engage in a discussion about who we wanted to be growing up in the 21st century, and maybe ask ourselves what building would serve that mission better. Well, everybody thought that was lovely and clapped their hands. And it was terrific, and we all went away. So I started a few weeks later, and in that first few weeks, I'm finding out where the coffee is and, who this person is and that person is. But I was also told that our collection of 14 million items, about 40% of it lived off-site in a storage facility run by Harvard in Southbury. You may be familiar with it. And that we were linked to that by a little van that would go back and forth between the two places every day. I was told that had always been so. Turns out this is about 20 years, but it's always been so. And we had assurances it was going to continue. Well, about 3 weeks into my tenure, I got the word from Harvard that they wanted us out. And they wanted us out by January. Now, what happened in the next 2 years is a saga unto itself, which I will not bore you with, but it was pretty dramatic. Because all of a sudden we were faced with this prospect of having 40% of our collection somewhere, and where was it going to be, and were we going to have access to it? And of course, it turned out to be a great gift for Harvard, from Harvard to me, though they didn't intend it that way, because it really sparked a discussion among my board, who I really had just met, about what would be the role of a new building. The upshot is, after a lot of drama back and forth, and basically a whole change of personnel, Harvard very quietly and in a very lovely way said, keep your stuff here until you come up with a plan for something later on. And I said, it could be 10 years. Or like, it's fine. And so the sort of Damocles, well, it's still dangling, but it's kind of over there. So we were able to, take a moment and proceed more thoughtfully. I also realized as 2017 turned into 2018, that this was a place that had just engaged in a strategic plan process and a mission statement process that didn't result in really, I thought, what it should have resulted in. But they were pretty fatigued. So I didn't use any of those words at all. Instead, we started having community conversations. And in 2018, that spring, we had probably about 4 or 5 of them. It was gathering people in a room, and it was the staff, and it was our fellows with a capital F and our fellows with a small f, our neighbors, people from other institutions. Everybody was, all of our boards, our advisors, all invited to, write on huge Post-it notes, questions about what do we do and what do we do best and what we would like to be. And we just gathered just tons and tons of information, which we, at some point collated and put into a document. And so we had started, without saying the words, strategic planning. 2018 and 19, our staff took over some of this document and started crafting a new mission statement, which is on our website. But they also wanted to add documentation about our vision and our values. And this turned out to be a very prescient move, because around 2019, we started doing the work that would become known as DEIA work, so diversity, equity, and inclusion. And ours came from a very different impulse. So if you think of the date, it's 2019. It's got to be about 6-9 months before what we call the racial reckoning of the murder of George Floyd, when institutions started taking this work seriously. For us, the impulse for the DEIA work came from a different place. So because we give out fellowships to academics, from undergraduates all the way up to, people on the verge of retiring, a lot of graduate students, people getting that first book out, people getting that third book out, somebody writing their Pulitzer Prize winning book. We're very, very attached to the Academy. There were certain ideas that were au courant in the Academy that we were very familiar with. So the idea of race and gender, not as biological realities, but as social constructs. We knew what we now think of as Black history. We knew about redlining and Reconstruction. We knew about race science and gender science, what now we're calling critical race theory. These were ideas that academics, I taught them in the 90s, and they were part of our culture. So we knew stuff, and we based our institutional values on that. But we decided we shouldn't be so complacent, and that we should actually start putting this stuff down on paper and maybe making things into policy. At the time, we didn't have a high-level HR person. I have to tell you that the spoiler alert of the story is we just hired one, but we didn't have an HR person to lead us through this kind of really important work. And I had to rely on the wonderful work and the spirit and the willingness of my colleagues. And when I say my colleagues, I mean my colleagues in the senior staff, like Elyssa Tardif, Dr. Tardif, but we had this DEI team that was really encompassed people who are very junior, very at the start of their careers, all the way up to senior staff. And it was really a robust team, and they really moved us forward in the DEI, in the DEI space, so that when the racial reckoning came about, we were able to say to ourselves, we were doing the right thing. And we were making progress with that work, always acknowledging that there is so much work to do. So all of this got us to about, the sort of 2000, the 2020 time, the pandemic time. And we decided that if transformation was on our minds, it was time to get serious. And so we were just about to change board chairs. My board chair had been Paul Sandman, who brought me in, and he was perfect for me to get me into the Historical Society. But we had a new board chair, and we have him now. We haven't worn him out yet. His name is Nuke Stillwell, and he was a ropes and gray lawyer. And he was interested in transformation as well. In fact, he told me he wouldn't have been board chair if he didn't want to change this place. And it's interesting for historical societies and for us. I mean, it's very common for a board chair or a president to be thinking about their career sort of 10 years out. We always have been thinking about the Historical Society about 75 years out. Because we've been around since 1791. We've had 3 or 4 homes. We move every 75, 100 years in response to something. Often it would be a storage thing. But we figure it's time to start setting the Historical Society up for the future. We want to get it out of basically a land built on water. We're on the Fenway. I know more about sea level rise and climate change than I ever thought I'd know. We also started talking about wanting a place to bring our collection together, right? In a way that it just hadn't been for over 100 years. It wasn't a horrible thing because we were pretty quiet, but during the pandemic, that little van I talked about stopped running and we were actually cut off from our collection. But beyond those really technical things is we started talking about wanting to be a very modern, welcoming historical society. Our building is beautiful. If you haven't been there, please come and see us, but it is an intimidating building. It is not welcoming. There's a lot of, bars and buzzers and white marble, and, it is very intimidating. We don't have room in the Historical Society for children. And education is definitely our growth area if we were a for-profit. Or for families, which is fine because we don't really have anything for families. So inspired by this, we engaged a brand strategist group called Kubla Werka, KW, and I recommend them to you highly. It's really 2 people, Mary Jane Kubla and Carl Werka, and they help, I guess they're in the transformation business. I could tell you a lot about them, but I'll just say this one thing. They help the gardener become the gardener, right? After the theft. So they were those people. And they've worked in the area, for decades and also nationally. And they really worked with us through 20 to 21 to bring us through with the board, a really educational process where the board really learned what we really did and what we could be. And it was this idea that we were going to become a bigger, more modern, more visible, more culturally relevant organization. And there's really only one way to be culturally relevant, and that's to serve. And it's to serve as many people and as many kinds of people as possible. And so this summer, my board made a financial decision to support us and to change my job. So my job is changing even as we speak. I'm moving from a president who was a manager with 11 direct reports to a president who is more of a CEO, so that I can go out in the world and be the embodiment of the mission. So restructuring the senior staff in a way I can sort of describe to you. And we're getting ready to really sharpen our strategic focus and engage in a 3-year plan that is going to make us more visible and more important in the world. And it's because we feel we have something to bring, which is not only our amazing collection, but historical expertise and the desire to communicate that. And as I said, our growth area is education. And on that note, I'm going to turn to my colleague, Elyssa Tardif. She is now one of, say, 2.5 people who do education, and we hope to grow that. But I'd love her to introduce you to really the program we're so proud to be the hosts and sponsors of, and that is National History Day in Massachusetts. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Elyssa.
Thank you so much, Catherine. Hi, everyone. It's really lovely to be here with you this afternoon. I really do wish that we were in Amherst right now. I won't go into this too much, but just to say that I do have a deep admiration for Amherst. My family is from Holyoke and Granby, so I've been out there my whole life. And I really did think at the age of, I think, 11, when I started writing poetry, that I was Emily Dickinson reincarnated. Was really adamant that I would go to Amherst College. They decided not to have me matriculate there, which was fine. Probably because I wrote in my college essay about being Emily Dickinson reincarnated. So I don't think that looked great. But I am really excited to speak with you, and really would love to engage Amherst again with the National History Day program. So I wanted to share with you, this is a really short video. It's about 3 minutes long. We worked with GBH about a year or so ago to put together a video that really kind of touches the main points of what History Day is and its impact on students and the community. So there are sort of snippets of an interview that I did with Comcast newsmakers, but also you'll hear from a couple of students as well. And it's always the best to hear from the ones who've actually gone through it. So I'll share my screen. National History Day hones the 21st century skills that students need to succeed in college and career. NHD prioritizes student-centered, hands-on learning that challenges students and keeps them engaged from inception of their project to the final product. Students in grades 6 through 12 can choose their own topic in American history, world history. They gather evidence to support a claim. So they're doing research at libraries and archives and digital collections. They craft it into a historical argument, and they present it in one of 5 ways: a website, an exhibit, a paper, a performance, and even a documentary film.
The experience alone is just so incredible. You learn so much about how to conduct research, how to conduct interviews, how to go back to the same project over and over with fresh eyes and think, how can I make this better? And no matter where you end up in any of the competitions, the skills that you get from going through the NHD experience are invaluable. You can use them in college, in university, in the workforce. These kinds of skills, the dedication to quality that you will develop through NHD, you should really do it for that.
Kristen Tobacco, a teacher from Classical High School in Lynn, has called NHD the most vital program we can use as educators today. Kristen says of NHD, it forces students to take a step back and think critically about what they are reading and hearing. At this moment in history, it is more important than ever to teach students to think for themselves and to learn how to evaluate the influx of information coming at them every day. They need to understand the world we live in and explore the complexity, the tragedy, and the beauty of human history. We really want to make sure that we are giving the opportunity to students across the state. We see students from the greater Boston area. We would love to engage Boston Public School District, students out in the central and western part of the state, and really give them the opportunity to participate in a project that they're passionate about, that they can feel proud of, that really rides this momentum of civic education that's happening right now in Massachusetts, and then get them ready for college. NHD is particularly powerful for students in lower socioeconomic communities. Recent studies show that low socioeconomic students drop out of college at higher rates than their middle-income peers. NHD provides the kind of rigorous academic experience that prepares students to manage the demands of college-level work.
It was just so incredible to actually touch history. It really changed my relationship with my topic, with history, historical research in general. So that was by far my favorite experience.
We learned how to actually do things.
Describe why it helped us.
Yeah.
And
that'll definitely help as we get older.
And that also got us thinking too. We would see some part and then it would send off this light bulb in our head that was like, oh, we could also use this and we could also do this.
We need sustainable funding for this program to enable access for all students across Massachusetts. Funding for NHD allows us to remove barriers for participation, like registration and transportation costs for students. Funding also helps us to deliver high-quality training and materials for teachers, and to offer easily searchable primary and secondary source content for students. At the Massachusetts Historical Society, we recognize the transformative power of National History Day for Massachusetts students. We are committed to expanding this program, particularly in lower socioeconomic districts, so that all of our students are equipped with the critical thinking and communication skills crucial to their success. Catherine, sorry, did you want to jump in here?
I just want to say, it was so funny when Gigi and I were sort of talking about this or emailing. She was saying, it's so funny, it's so unfair that the athletes get the parades and the cheering from the stands. And what I loved about your video, Elyssa, is it shows that I'm going to use the phrase history nerds are also getting the love and the cheering and if you go to the competitions, you'll see it. People are holding their signs. Parents are cheering in the stands. It was great.
It's great to see kids at the competition, because if you talk to them while they're working on the project, there's a little less joy. They're very focused. It's a rigor. They always say how hard it was. It's one of the hardest projects they've ever done in school. But when you talk to them at the end, and then even years down the road, which we do, it serves them in a multitude of ways, and they're always incredibly grateful to have had the experience. So just to kind of pull out a few points from the video, what we see with History Day is, this is a research project that can last really the whole academic year if students follow it all the way to nationals. And so it's connecting with even students who are not interested in history. They get to choose their topic. So this can be anything from local history to US history, world history, whatever kind of they happen to be curious about, they can explore that through their project. So right from the beginning, you really get student buy-in. And so it's honoring student voice by doing it in this way, and also helping them connect to things that they're passionate about, they're excited about, their own heritage, for example, their family's history. But what, the students kind of don't know is happening as they're going through is it's really equipping them with just really critical 21st century skills. So critical thinking skills, media literacy. I talked in the video about how, all of us, of course, there's information everywhere. Where do we get our news from? It's really very difficult for students to know, understand about bias, what sources are credible. They learn about weighing evidence and looking for multiple perspectives on a topic and then coming to their own conclusion. So it's not only about kind of filtering and evaluating that information, but it's really kind of boosting their own confidence that they, feel empowered to know what's right, to know what the right pathway might be to affect change in their community. So there's a really very strong civic learning component to the History Day program. And as many of you may know, in 2018, Massachusetts passed a law that all students in 8th grade and then in high school have to do a civics project. So there's a full civics course in 8th grade now, and then they're doing these 2 civics projects. And we really see History Day as a very important complement to that, because in order to do a project in your community and kind of really understand how to tackle that topic, you need to be able to do research to find out why are we, at the stage we are right now? Where did this, what are the origins of this kind of challenge in the community? And they're really able to do that once they've gone through the History Day process. So I thought at this point, Catherine, I could go through a couple of examples of student projects, if that sounds good.
Sounds good. And I just want to add that, we are very high on this because this is something we can do because we're historians. So the kind of critical thinking and media literacy and evaluation and ability to put together an argument, those are the skills of the historian. And as you said on the film so beautifully, those are the skills that get you into college and keep you into college. And, there's a lot of educational experiments and organizations out there. History Day has been around for about 40 years.
Yes.
And has all the kind of data that you want your funders to see, including showing how participation in History Day means that students succeed in all of their learning and not just in history. But yeah, tell us some stories. And also, Gigi, I don't know how much time we have exactly. Is this just supposed to be an hour?
This is fine. We've adjourned the official meeting and we can hang together for, another 20 minutes or so. 25. I don't know.
So why don't we do this, Elyssa? If you'll tell us some stories, and then maybe we could just open it up to questions and see where it goes from there.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to have the two of you think about a bit. We have a school system whose teachers are very hard pressed to do what they're doing, and suggestions on how to get around that problem would be great. But
sure.
And we can talk about that at another time too, if there's interest.
Yeah, and Gigi,
Go ahead. I'd love to hear some good stories. I think that's great.
Well, and your question about teachers is one that keeps me up at night. So it's something that we think about all the time.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would say too, to Catherine's point about, this is really for all students. And I know all of us in this room love history very much. But really, we see students, their performance in all subjects improves after they've done History Day. And we have students who are not at all interested in history. They wanted, we had a student group that went all the way to nationals studying the Woburn Cancer Cluster. 2 of them are now pre-med. We have a student who went to nationals who's going to be an astronaut. So these are, people who have a passing interest in history, but really they're just building these really key skills that serve them in college and then their career, afterwards. So I think that's, just kind of an important point. So we have had, it's really difficult to sort of choose a favorite project, but I'll just share a few with you. So we had a student a few years ago who interviewed her grandmother to find out what it was like to be a part of the civil rights movement as a Black woman in Massachusetts. So she did an oral history with her grandmother, and it was, of course, incredible for the student, but wonderful for the grandmother as well to have this, her life story and her work and her legacy recorded in this way. We had a student who researched his family who had come to the US, left Korea in 1950, and kind of what that journey, a really very frightening journey for them, what that was like. And he talked after having done the project about how much he felt proud of his family, and it really deepened his sort of sense of pride in his heritage after doing NHD. And we also had a student who did a project on kind of local Massachusetts history. It wasn't at all involved in what he did the following year, which was to take all of the kind of project management research skills that he had honed. And he decided that there were not enough mental health supports in his school. And so he conducted basically a school-wide effort. He surveyed all of his peers. He presented this at the school board. This was all voluntary, and really got past some wonderful supports for his peers. And again, had nothing at all to do with the topic that he studied, but because he felt equipped and he understood how change happens at the school level, kind of in his community, and he was able to kind of use those tools to make that change, which is really, I think, kind of wonderful. I do have, I won't take too much time with this. I'll just show you maybe the first 2 minutes of it. But this was a documentary film that went to nationals a couple of years ago. And I defy you to sort of keep remembering that it's a student's film, because I think, I kind of get really very into it and I forget that it was a student. But and this just to show you too that students tend to tackle, 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century history. It's not just sort of, the sort of dusty past. And of course, for, students now, anything 20 years ago or more is, ancient history. So this was ancient for some folks, but let me share my screen one more time here.
Armbands, a 2-inch piece of black cloth. It may seem simple, but wearing this small article was a substantial act of courage and launched a case that went all the way to the Supreme Court. When 3 students from Des Moines, Iowa wore armbands in defiance of the school rules, they started a chain of events that would hold lasting precedent. Their actions meant taking a stand against the school administrators, and their protest would bring about one of the biggest changes to American public school policy in history. The year was 1965. 184,000 American soldiers were stationed in Vietnam, and Operation Rolling Thunder was underway. The Voting Rights Act was signed into law by President Johnson. Malcolm X had just been assassinated. A wave of protests were sweeping across the nation. Senator Robert F. Kennedy proposed a permanent end to hostilities in Vietnam, starting with an extension of the Christmas truce. However, at that time, the war was widely supported across the country, so Senator Kennedy's proposal gained little ground. A peaceful end to the war was not in sight. Inspired by Kennedy's proposal, 3 students, Mary Beth Tinker, John Tinker, and Christopher Eckhart, hatched a plan to publicly campaign against the Vietnam War and mourn the dead. In a move of solidarity, the group decided to wear black armbands at school during the Christmas truce.
For one thing, we've been taught all our lives, as kids are, that peace is the way.
We grew up learning to be sympathetic to people who were suffering. And during the war, of course, lots of people suffered.
Ross Peterson.
So I'll stop us here, but I will say, and I'll put the link
Sure.
in chat if you'd like to read it, or you just, yeah, I'm sort of leaving us on a cliffhanger because they do go to the Supreme Court, and spoiler alert, they do win their case. Gigi, did I cut you off? I'm sorry. Were you about to say something?
No, that's okay. I'm just so impressed to see these projects. I'm amazed.
Well, thank you. And I wish I could show you the full 10 minutes, but I mean, really what, these students are doing is, weaving so seamlessly the primary sources that they're investigating. They track down, the tinkers to talk with them. So they're having to figure out sort of how to be professional, how some of these students actually don't know how to write an email to an adult. They just don't do that. And so they're learning these really very important skills. So yeah, such a pleasure to share that with you.
Listen, I don't know if you're going to do this, Elyssa, but we are going to hit you up to be a judge for History Day projects. Now that we're doing everything on Zoom, but one of my colleagues who got roped into it by Elyssa a few years ago and does it every year, he says, if you ever lose faith in the youth of America, just be a History Day judge, because when you see these projects and listen to the students talk about them, it's an incredibly inspiring activity that you too can do. But maybe we should open this up for questions, but let me address, Gigi, your thought. The great thing, so it used to be History Day, it was a hard ask for a teacher. Mm-hmm. Some teachers did kind of incorporate it into the actual school day, but for others, it was a after school activity that they volunteered for the way a coach would, and for no pay, right? But Elyssa, you mentioned now that there's actually a requirement. So doesn't that mean teachers can actually use History Day in their classroom?
Yes. And in fact, that is where we see the strongest programs, the programs that are able to be sustained beyond, 1 or 2 years, is when it is taught in the classroom. We do see different models, there's that. There's also after school clubs. There's sometimes where it's just kind of one student in a district that really wants to do it and they talk to their teacher about it. And we really, we welcome kind of any iteration of it. And when it starts smaller, we at least can sort of introduce it to the district and then start to build. So there are, Gigi, you mentioned just the burden on teachers. I mean, it really is quite extreme, and certainly the pandemic has made things much, much more difficult. And so the tack that we are taking is that this is solving problems for you. It seems like it's a new program that you're putting onto your students, but they are going to be doing some kind of research project at some point. And in introducing kind of History Day to the mix, you're prepping them for the civic learning and the civic project that they're going to have to do. And what we also offer is a year's worth of programming and resources to help guide student research. So we do teacher training, we do virtual chats where we can help guide students to find the right resources. Sometimes it's at the MHS, sometimes it's not, and we can point them in the direction of other archives and other collections. And I'll put in the chat right now one of the resources that we recently developed called History Source, which is basically a collection of primary source sets and classroom materials for teachers. So we know that teachers have incredibly limited, first of all, instructional time, but in terms of prep time for their class, they have their kind of go-to sites. It's Library of Congress, we hear a lot, Gilder Lehrman, Institute of American History, they go there. We're trying to make it so that History Source is one of their go-to sources because we want it to be as easy as possible for teachers to grab a couple of primary sources, a student worksheet, an activity, and plug it right into what they're already doing. So basically, we're providing them a way to bring in maybe more robust primary sources than they've been using. Maybe they didn't have time and they just grab something from Wikipedia. It happens all the time. We can offer, a primary source that actually might bring it, might touch on a few different themes. So something that would have taken, 2 days in class, they can now do in one lesson because they get to tackle it because of this really rich primary source that they have. So we really are thinking about History Day, as I said, as sort of solving problems for teachers rather than something additional that they have to figure out how to work in.
That's a great way to talk about it, actually, with teachers.
And truly the best way to, oh, I'm sorry, I interrupted, please.
No, go ahead, Elyssa.
I think, there's that. And then there's also having teachers talk to other teachers about it. We really say, come judge the competition, see how transformative this is for students. And when teachers do that, they say, no, I have to bring this in. This is exactly what I want my students to experience. So that's the other way that we found works very well.
Are there questions? I'm just opening it up to the group.
I have a question. Just when you talk about History Day, which looks fascinating, I'm seeing analogies, possible connections with the Boy Scouts Eagle Scout program. Is that something you can talk about?
In terms of whether we've worked with that group, do you mean, or how it might complement?
Well, how they might complement each other. Eagle Scouts pick a project and work on it, and so do you. And I'm just seeing some similarities there. And have you worked with them?
No, we have not. I think there's certainly, and it's a question that we get sometimes about kind of service learning projects. And so there's the civics project, and then there's History Day, and they're all, distinct. I think the difference with History Day is that, it is going on often, in the classroom. So it's sometimes an extracurricular activity, but usually not. I think it's certainly, I wouldn't say we would do one or the other. I think they both serve very different needs. I think it gets, as you're talking about Eagle Scouts, this is getting them out into the community in a very specific kind of concrete way. This project that they're going to take on, whether it's, I've seen like amazing projects that really sort of beautify an area or whatever it might be. And I think for the students, this is about just equipping with different types of skills. It's a critical thinking,
this is
the
really,
media literacy.
this is really, George, just to add on. I mean, I'm sure there's wonderful things that come out of a Scout project. And I think of things about character and work and awareness. And this is really about, in addition to all kinds of wonderful things, acquiring a very specific set of academic skills. And this, in some ways, is our little way of addressing the incredible wealth and inequality gap in our world. One of the things we know is getting through college and getting a college degree is a step toward the middle class. We all know that. And when a child does that from an underserved community, it's also not just about that one child, but about their family and their community. Suddenly there's a path to college. And one of the problems with kids staying in college is they don't know how to do this very specific thing, which is they don't know how to write an argument and support it with evidence. And they don't know how to research to get that evidence to support that argument. It's a very specific thing, but once you learn it, that's what takes you through college. And that's what you learn at fancy private schools or good public schools. Just these kids aren't learning it. So this is about, I kind of compare Elyssa and me like ninjas. History Day lets us go in, teach this very specific skill. They get to rewrite things, which they don't get to do that in regular school. And that's the thing that will allow them to write something that gets them into college. And when faced with college work, they know how to do this thing. So that, I think, is different from other programs, which are more expansive and about a whole lot of things, I think.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We have quite a number of interns, as you heard. Is it possible for like a UMass graduate student to somehow get a group of high school students to participate in National History Day, or does it have to come through a school system?
So it doesn't have to come through a school system. We do ask that the student be paired with a teacher mentor to help guide them through the process. So that would be the one sort of stipulation. Now, I think mentorship is hugely important as part of this process. So I think that intern could still have a really important role and vital role to play in working.
You need
with
the teacher.
I mean, really, that is, to be honest, that's more of a sort of paperwork situation. Like we need a teacher to be responsible for them, right? But I think there's still, we encourage mentorship beyond just that one teacher.
Interesting. That might be a way to support this project. And UMass has a great public history as well as education department.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's definitely a growth area for us. I mean, you saw on that map, we are woefully underrepresented in Western Mass. I mean,
We need to do something about that.
yes, it's quite terrible. And one of the ways is that we're approaching pre-service teachers. So at teaching colleges to introduce this to teachers right away. We're looking to get judges from undergrad and graduate students as well. So there are lots of opportunities to get involved. And I did put the if I may, I put our link to the Mass History Day site in the chat. So if you're interested in becoming a judge, we have regional competitions coming up in March, and then our state contest is April 1st. So there are several opportunities to get involved. And we do have a contest in Leicester this year. So we're slowly but surely making our way out west.
Excellent. Yeah, the reason, I mean, I actually learned about History Day, I don't know when. I had a college friend whose teenage daughter participated in a regional competition that was held in Sturbridge.
Oh, yes.
So it had to have been 25 or 30 years ago. And I went back to work at the Antiquarian Society and told my colleagues, not the administration, however, about it. And not long after, we had a couple of inquiries about coming and using the Antiquarian Society by a student. And our head of reader services said fine, and there had to be a responsible adult. Well, our director came out and saw this youngster in the reading room and kind of went ballistic, which was a bit embarrassing because one of the founders of History Day was George Bilius, a very respected professor at Clark University, and George was there in the reading room, and he was very sympathetic to my distress. And but it worked out all right, and we did have, and I suppose we still do have high school students who come use the resources of that library. But it was quite, I think it's a great program, and I really wish that we could get some involvement out here in Western Massachusetts. Fill in your map a little bit.
Well, let's agree just to keep the conversation going and see what we can do.
Yeah. There was going to be a high school, one of our volunteers was a young woman named Lily Gould, and her father teaches social studies, the AP history course. And he was going to be with us today, and I guess the son took him away, but I'll keep working with him and see if something could develop, and put him in touch with you, Elyssa, because
Gigi, I think I see a hand raised, if I can interrupt you.
Oh,
there's Ludmilla. I think we probably have time for one more question, and then I do have to go.
Sure. I just wanted to ask quickly, can you give us a sense of the timeline? Like if there were a student or a teacher who wanted to participate this year, what does that look like? I'm trying to sort of find information on dates or important dates, and it seems to be kind of all over the page. And also, I was looking at the resources available from the Mass Historic Society, and it looks like you stop at 1920. Are there a set of resources that you have, let's say, from 1920 to 1970?
We sure questions. Yes, and I'll start with that question. So we have actually recently, 2 weeks ago, just launched the history source. So we are keeping it kind of small and manageable, but certainly building out. So this is, I would say, representative rather than exhaustive. If you go, the Historical Society site, masshist.org, we have far more digitized collections available that go beyond 1920. But it's a fair point. And in terms of the other question about timeline, so for this year, I would recommend teachers who want to get involved, we would welcome them as volunteer judges at the competitions. Basically, students are really right now in the heart of putting their projects together. So typically, things get started in September. That's when students will select their topics. They will do research in the fall and winter. School competitions typically happen in late January, February. And then there's regionals in March, state contests in April, and then June is the national contest down just outside DC.
Great.
Thank you so much, everybody. This was such
Very
an honor
helpful.
to
Thank
be
you.
here.
So
Thank
thank
you.
you, Catherine. Thank you, Elyssa. And I hope this is part of a continuing conversation. I think it would be great to be involved. And Ludmilla, if you have questions, please do be in touch. Or if you want to do something like judge, let them know. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Catherine.
you.
This is great. Thank you all.